We wanted to talk today a little bit about irrigation. Can you give us some irrigation tips?
Yes. In fact, one thing that we've learned in recent years is we need to rethink how we irrigate our lawns. To be brutally honest, across the state of Tennessee, not that many individuals water their lawns. But it's interesting to me that over 75% of that turf grass plant is water.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So irrigation, the key is if you're going to spend money to irrigate, let's try to do it right.
Okay. So where does irrigation fit in with kind of the overall turf and grass care?
Well, whenever you pick up a lawn guide at a Home Depot or a Lowe's or your local garden center, the Sunset series or the Scott series, you'll see on that picture there's this pristine lawn. Usually when you look at that picture on that guide, you won't see a dandelion. You won't see ground ivy. You won't see wild garlic. Mm-hmm. You'll see a very pristine lawn, almost as high in quality as a golf course fairway would be.
Right.
Which you have some awesome golf courses here in the village. But the reality is, when you start to study turf grass management or turf care, there are primary management practices and supplementary practices.
Okay.
Okay, so mowing, and a lot of people hesitate to admit it, but mowing, I enjoy mowing because I don't have my phone with me and I'm out there with nature, and I like straight lines.
Okay.
And so I'm in control of what that lawn looks like, and when I get done, I can see what I've done. So I enjoy mowing, but mowing is a primary lawn care practice. Fertilization. Here in Tennessee, our soils generally don't supply the turf grasses with enough nitrogen. And they may not supply the turf grasses with enough phosphorus or potassium. So that's why we encourage homeowners to soil test. But generally speaking, you should be fertilizing your lawns with nitrogen at some point during the growing season. You don't want to fertilize when the turf grasses are stressed. You don't want to force them to grow when the weather conditions are not proper.
Okay.
But the third major or primary care practice is irrigation. But again, in many cases in residential turfs in Tennessee, irrigation is not part of the formula because Tennessee homeowners have not invested in an irrigation system.
Okay.
So, but it's interesting to me that 55% of our golf course acreages are irrigated. 85% plus of our sod production acreages are irrigated.
Okay.
So if your job depends on you providing an appropriate quality of turf for the golfing public, or an appropriate quality of turf that you can produce the turf, harvest it, produce as rapidly as you can, and harvest again, you're going to almost 99% of the time you're going to find that irrigation is an advantage. So irrigation is one of the three major turf care practices. So here in the village, your landowners that are irrigating, that is a tremendous advantage.
We do have a lot of folks that do irrigate here in the village, and so that's something that's part of why we wanted you here, for the folks that do irrigate, that we want to make sure that they're irrigating the right way.
And that is a goal of the University of Tennessee as well. And things have changed, Bud, so that's why I'm excited to be here this morning.
Well, great, great. You mentioned primary and secondary lawn care practices. Talk a little bit about proper mowing height and maybe dethatching, and how often should that be done?
That's a very good question. When you're managing turf, you're actually managing three zones.
Okay.
The most obvious zone of management is the aerial chutes. That's the area that we see when we go out to get into the automobile, or we get out and walk the dog, we generally see that green stuff, the aerial chutes. And a healthy, actively growing turf is green because of the process of photosynthesis. As that light strikes that turf, it uses, the turfgrass plant is capable of intercepting blue and red light, but it reflects green light. And so that's why we are the beneficiaries of that process.
Okay.
So, but the other two areas or zones are just as critically important as what we view. The thatch layer is the intermediate layer that lies above the soil surface and below the leaf tip. Okay, so thatch, if it becomes excessive, as turf grasses grow, they just naturally slough off leaves and tillers and stolons or rhizomes, which are above and below ground runners. And thatch can accumulate to the point that it actually, there's more than 1/2 inch. And when you have more than 1/2 inch of thatch in your lawn, it's time to dethatch. Athletes like to fall on natural, they don't necessarily like to fall, but if they fall, they prefer to fall on a turf that is resilient. It absorbs shock. So thatch is almost that shock absorber. So on sports fields, we like a certain level of thatch. As homeowners, we like a certain level of thatch because we may fall. And so it absorbs shock, but it can reach excessive levels, and then we would dethatch.
Okay.
Roots are the third part. The root system is extremely important. Think about this. The number one factor that restricts turfgrass rooting growth is a lack of oxygen in the soil.
Okay.
Okay. But what does the turfgrass plant produce and release to the atmosphere such that we can live?
It releases oxygen.
Yes. So isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
So the turfgrass may be suffering below ground due to a lack of oxygen, but it's producing oxygen and it's releasing it back to the atmosphere. So one thing that is very, very important to remember, and it's a trick question we ask of our students at UT. Sometimes the best question to ask a student is, do turf grasses grow in soils? And when we ask those questions, sometimes we get this look from our students as though, boy, this is a trick question. And I contend, as the extension turfgrass specialist at UT, the turf grasses are rooted in soils, but they grow in oxygen. The roots are actually moving along and around those soil particles. And so if you have a compacted soil, we've got issues in our home lawns, in our commercial turfs, and so on.
Well, and that's something that I wanted to bring up. Here in East Tennessee, we aren't blessed with particularly good topsoils. We've got a lot of, we've got a lot of clay soils. They don't drain well. What makes a good soil, and what's the best way to transform our native soil into something that really supports a nice turf grass?
Well, the term transform is a really good term. We can improve an existing soil by using a process called core aerification. And many of your clients or your homeowners or landowners here play golf, and they probably hate when the golf greens are aerified. But it's amazing how beneficial that is. Soils have minerals, sand, silt, and clay. Well, sand, silt, and clay, those are just definitions based on the particle size that exists in those soils. So a clay particle is extremely small. A sand particle is fairly large, and a silt particle is in between. I wish all of the homeowners here in the village could manage turfs in loam-based soils. A loam-based soil has no more than 40% clay. Now, I would guess that if we took a tour today, just probably a walking tour, and checked 12 home lawns, we'd be lucky to find a clay loam soil. The term loam implies that there's a certain amount of sand in that base. So I've used the word sand, and you used the word modify or improve. I would encourage the homeowners that are interested in improving the soil, actually think about using organic matter to improve the soil.
Okay.
A soil that's rich in organic matter, even though it may be high in clay, the organic matter tends to aggregate the clay particles so that they perform as larger particles. And the pores between those larger particles are larger, and that allows the water to infiltrate and percolate through that soil much more quickly.
Huh. Okay.
So what I would do is, and gosh, we've got good close access to mushroom compost. You could aerify that lawn in the fall just before you plan to interseed. You could bring, you could have the lawn aerified. You can broadcast seed, and then you could put a light layer of good mature compost, such as the the mushroom compost over the top. And the idea is the organic material would move down into those channels and keep that channel that you've aerified from pinching off at the top. By having that organic matter in filling those channels, water will quickly move into that soil from the soil surface.
Okay. And you recommend that as a end of growing season?
Well,
generally.
No. Well, when you think about it, when you're managing the tall fescues and the bluegrasses, they're actually beginning the growing season in September.
Okay.
They've suffered pretty much July and August due to heat, due to drought, and you can handle the drought because you can water, but you can't air condition with water.
True. Okay.
Okay. So what you're really doing is you're getting that lawn. You're basically interseeding that lawn to fortify that stand such that you've got a good, strong, dense stand of turf. The best weed control is a dense, actively growing turf. It's not a product in a bag or a bottle.
Okay. So that kind of talks about proper mowing height as well, doesn't it?
No, I forgot the proper mowing height. But what you can do, when the growing conditions are very good, for cool season grasses, they prefer 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. For warm season turf grasses, many homeowners in the village may have zoysia grass. Well, see, that lawn grows best in May, June, July, and early August, between 80 to 95 degrees. So your management is much different depending on whether you have a warm season turf grass that you're managing or a cool season turf grass. So let's think about the tall fescue, because that's the predominant lawn grass that is in East Tennessee. What we typically would do is we would mow somewhere between 2 and 3.5 inches when conditions are favorable: September, October, April, March. But as you approach the stress periods, such as low temperature extremes in the winter, and you're approaching summertime, don't be afraid to elevate the height of cut going into those stress periods. So you might raise your height of cut a 1/2 inch higher in preparation for the stressful periods.
Okay.
And by doing so, that stimulates that turf grass plant to generate more roots and deeper rooting. And by that deeper rooting, by elevating the height of cut, you've got better insulation value, so your soil surface temperatures don't reach quite the extreme high that they would had you been mowing at a very short mowing height.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Right now, of course, we're in the middle of summertime, and so irrigation is something that's on everyone's mind. Talk a little bit, if you would, about how much water we should be applying to our lawns.
Thank goodness we're starting to research and try to find varieties of turf grasses that require less water. Many homeowners in the village may not appreciate Bermuda grass as a lawn grass. They may consider it a weed grass, which I do in my lawn because I have zoysia grass. And so Bermuda grass in a zoysia grass lawn is actually a weed in my view. But there's a Bermuda grass on the market right now that requires 30% less water than other varieties. And so there's also a move. Our turfgrass breeders are really starting to develop new varieties of fescues, bluegrasses, Bermuda grasses, zoysia grasses that require less management input. And one of those highest priorities is let's use newer varieties that require less water. That does not mean that you're not going to benefit from having an irrigation system. It just means you're going to be able to conserve water because they're not requiring as much.
Are these new varieties of turf grasses, are they on the market now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would encourage the homeowners here in the village, just because you planted, let's say, Rebel Supreme 3 years ago, don't necessarily always think that you've got to go back to that exact blend or that exact variety. There's a program underway. It's called the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program. Believe it or not, it's on a national level. And the website is ntep.org.
Okay.
ntep.org. And homeowners, and I'm on that site probably at least twice a month, just to look at how certain varieties are performing in what we call the Northern Transition Zone. Here in Tennessee, as my great friend Dr. John Sorokin, who teaches many of our turf course classes in Knoxville, says, we're in an area of the United States in which we can maintain turf grasses equally poorly.
Okay.
Yeah, we really are in one of the most stressful geographic locations in which to manage excellent turf season long. By having an irrigation system, we can extend the quality time in which your lawn is at its highest quality. But again, the turf grass is still going, the cool season grasses are going to be extremely stressed in July, and the warm season grasses like zoysia grasses, they're still going to go dormant in the wintertime. So the turf grasses are still experiencing these weather stresses, but the fact that that plant that's 75+% water when it's actively growing, the neat thing is that when you've got an irrigation system, you can supplement Mother Nature.
Great. So for the people that do have irrigation systems, are there good practices for how much water they should be applying and how often they should be irrigating?
Yes, I was taught that, and certain species require more water. Bermuda grasses generally use a little bit more water than zoysia grasses. Some of the homeowners that have moved in from the southern part of the United States are familiar with centipede grass. That requires very little water. That's why Tennessee Valley Authority is interested in that particular species. Because of as a species, that particular species requires less water than some others. But generally speaking, if you're putting out 1 inch of water per week throughout the time that's appropriate for watering, generally there's a water deficit between here if you're managing cool season grasses or warm season grasses, where Mother Nature or natural rainfall does not meet the water demands of that plant from about late March through the 3rd week of September in East Tennessee. So that's the irrigation window. You will definitely find it's advantageous to apply a little more water during July and August than you were applying in May. But in general, turf grass water use, the general recommendation is apply about 1 inch of water per week and utilize a 1/2 inch of water each time you irrigate. And Bud, I hope you like tuna fish.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
The reason being, you'll have an idea of how long it takes to apply 1/2 inch of water, but a homeowner needs to know that. The irrigation contractor and the irrigation designer knows exactly how much water is going through that irrigation head per minute. Okay, but pressures differ, and thus water output differs. So what I do, if I'm trying to calibrate my irrigation system, if I've got a 5,000 square foot lawn and I've got maybe 5 zones, I'm putting an empty can of tuna fish one per 1,000 square feet, and I'm actually timing the irrigation system. I'm going to activate the irrigation system for 15 minutes, and then I'm going to go measure how much water I've got in the irrigation in a tuna fish can, empty tuna fish can.
Okay.
And it'll kind of give you an idea how long it takes your system to deliver that 1/2 inch.
Okay.
And hopefully you'll do that no more than twice a week during good growing conditions. Once that turf becomes extremely stressed, you're going to probably want to shorten the irrigation interval, but your key is water such that you water the root zone thoroughly, but you don't want to put too much water out so that water moves below the root system, because the turf grasses aren't going to be able to utilize that.
Okay.
So it may be that you're watering in July and August here in the village 3 times or 4 times a week, and you're putting out a 1/4 inch per application.
Okay. So, but that 1 inch of water per week.
That's kind of the generalized rule.
Okay.
I'll guarantee you there are weeks when you're going to be slightly below ideal water conditions, but you can keep a turf grass actively growing, and most sod producers, when they site a new production site, they'll want to be able to apply no less than a 1/2 inch of water a week, because they know they can keep that turf grass actively growing by as little as 1/2 inch of water a week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, those folks definitely know how to grow grass, so we can learn something from them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Tom, I want to thank you for coming in. Can you kind of wrap up what we've talked about?
Yeah, in terms of summary, we didn't really talk about irrigation and disease, but I'm guessing that many homeowners in the village have seen large brown patch in tall fescue this year, maybe even seen large patch in zoysia grass. It's caused by the same organism, but they're called different. They're basically termed differently in terms of how you refer to it. Rhizoctonia solani is the fungal organism that's responsible for what we call large brown patch in tall fescue. And there's a disease called Pythium. It's actually a water mold. It loves moisture. And some fungal organisms produce spores. Others will actually create this vegetative mass that looks like a spider web. How many of you have seen like a spider web look in a patch area in your lawn particularly when there's a dew on? Mm-hmm. So these fungal organisms, they'll move in free moisture. So one tip from a perspective of trying to prevent diseases from moving from an area that's diseased to an area that's not diseased, let's not water during sun up or sundown.
Okay.
Okay, and if we water during the dew period, the impact of that irrigation water droplet can actually splash that dew into an area that's unaffected. And that dew can contain the fungal spores that allow that fungus to continue to move into your lawn.
Okay.
So proper timing of irrigation. So I'm going to encourage the homeowners, this is a little bit different than I was taught back in the mid-'80s, but try not to extend the dew period. I was always taught, when's the best time to irrigate? Well, you want to irrigate in the early morning. A pathologist would say, well, I don't have a problem with you irrigating at 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, why is that? Well, see, the water that is being applied evaporates very quickly off the leaf surfaces, and remember we said fungal organisms tend to like to move through free moisture. So if you can maintain a dry turfgrass tissue, it's less prone to disease. So a pathologist may say, well, I don't mind if you irrigate at 2 o'clock, but I mind because we want to conserve our pocketbook and we want to conserve water. So we generally have said for many, many years, water in the early morning. But now the caveat, the little asterisk is, let's not extend the dew period. So let's not water through the dew period. So let's let's time our irrigations where we maybe have been irrigating from 5 in the morning till 8 in the morning. Let's back up and irrigate from 3 in the morning till about 6:30. Then let that water move in, let the leaves dry, and then if you have to reactivate the system to complete your irrigation sequence, then activate it at 10 o'clock and water till maybe noon.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a different strategy. I'm not sure that would be a strategy that I would use if I was in Arizona. Mm-hmm. You know, but because we have so much humidity and our temperatures get up to the optimum temperature for massive sporulation and massive growth of this fungal mycelium, we're actually promoting the disease by allowing that turf to remain wet for too long.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is that you would like for people to have their irrigation stop before the dew would naturally burn off?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good to know. Doc, I appreciate you coming in. This was a good conversation.
It's always fun for me, and let me put a plug in. I personally believe, and I get to travel the state, but I love working here at the village. It's not really work for me, but I'm always impressed at the proactive approach that you take as the Landowners Association. I don't know whether to call it the Landowners Association, the Property Owners Association, so forgive me, but I want you to know it's fun to see the professionals and the volunteer hours that are put in to make the village what it is. And the village is a very special place.